All right, chapter 15. Okay, Rob finally gets that feeling of happiness, okay? And we know that it's most likely probably from Sistine, maybe a little bit of the tiger, okay? All right, let's do 15. Here we go. By the time they made it back to the motel parking lot, wait, why were they going back to the motel parking lot? Maddox?
Because Beauchamp was going to the woods.
They heard a car coming, yeah, and the tiger was like, you know, like sometimes when animals, like, yeah, cats prick their ears to like,
Yeah,
when they like cock their head, they hear something.
Oh, I
Okay.
heard when they do that, it lets them hear the sound.
Maybe, yeah. By the time they made it back to the motel parking lot, it was dark outside, and they were both laughing so hard they could barely walk. Rob, said his father. He was standing at the door to their room. The blue-gray light from inside seeped out around him. Yes, sir, said Rob, and he dropped Sistine's hand. He stood up straight. Where you been? Out in the woods. Did you finish up all them jobs I told you to do? Yes, sir, said Rob. Who you got with you? His father said, squinting into the darkness. Sistine drew herself up tall. This is Sistine, said Rob. Uh-huh, his father said, still squinting. You live around here? He said. For now, said Sistine. Your parents know you're out here? I was going to call my mother, said Sistine. There's a payphone down in the laundry room, said Rob's father. In the laundry room? Sistine repeated, her voice full of disbelief. She put her hands on her hips. We don't got a phone in the room, Rob said to her softly. Good grief, said Sistine. Well, can I have some change at least? As you know, a payphone, you gotta get quarters, gotta put it in, pay for your call. Rob's father reached into his pants pocket and pulled out a handful of coins. He balanced the money in the palm of his hand, as if he was preparing to do a magic trick. And Rob stepped forward and took the coins from him and handed them to Sistine. You want me to go with you? He asked her. No, she said. I'll find it. Thank you very much. Rob, his father said as Sistine marched away, swinging her arms. What's that girl doing in your clothes? She had on a dress, Rob said. It was too pretty to wear out in the woods. Come on in here, his father commanded. Let's go get that medicine on your legs. Yes, sir, said Rob. He walked toward the room slowly. His happiness had evaporated. His legs itched. And in the motel room, he knew it would be as dark as a cave, lit only by the light of the gray TV. That's pretty good imagery there. We can go back and write it. When his mother was alive, the world had seemed full of light. The Christmas before she died, she had strung the outside of their house in Jacksonville with hundreds of white lights. Every night, the house lit up like a constellation, and they were all inside it together, the three of them, and they were happy. Rob remembered, and as he remembered, he stepped into the motel room. He shook his head and scolded himself for opening his suitcase. Just thinking about all the things that were gone now seemed to make the darkness darker. Chapter 16. Rob sat out on the curb in front of the motel room and waited for Sistine to come back from using the phone. He had her green dress wrapped up in a grocery bag. He had tried to fold the dress up neatly, but folding a dress turned out to be an impossible task, and he finally gave up. Now he held the bag out away from him so that the grease from the medicine on his legs wouldn't stain it. He was relieved when Sistine finally walked toward him out of the darkness. Hey, he said. Hi. She sat down on the steps next to him. How come you don't have a phone? Rob shrugged. Ain't got nobody to call, I guess. My mother's coming to get me, Sistine said. Rob nodded. Here's your dress. He handed her the bag. Sistine took it and then tilted her head to look up at the sky. And Rob looked up now, too. The clouds had shifted, and there were clear patches where the stars shone through. I can see the Big Dipper, Sistine said. I like looking up at things. So do my mom and dad. That's how they met. They were both looking up at the ceiling in the Sistine Chapel, and they weren't watching where they were going, and they bumped into each other. That's why I'm named Sistine. I like your name, said Rob, shyly. I've seen the Sistine ceiling too, she said. They took me last year, before Bridget, when they were still in love. Does it look like the pictures? Rob asked. Better, said Sistine. It's like, I don't know, it's like looking at fireworks, kind of. Oh, said Rob. Maybe we could go to Italy sometime and I could show you. Well, that'd be all right, said Rob, and he smiled into the darkness. That tiger, he can't look up at the stars, said Sistine, her voice getting hard. He's got that piece of wood over his head. He can't look up at all. We've got to let him go. Rob was silent. He was hoping that if he didn't answer her, she might go back to talking about the Sistine ceiling. How did your mother die? She asked suddenly. Rob sighed. He knew there was no point in trying not to answer. Cancer, he said. What was her name? I ain't supposed to talk about her, said Rob, closing his eyes to the stars and concentrating instead on his suitcase, working to keep it closed. Why not? Asked Sistine. Because my dad says it's no good to talk about it. He says she's gone and she ain't coming back. That's why we moved here from Jacksonville, because everybody wanted to talk about her. We moved down here to get on with things. There was a crunch of the gravel. Rob opened his eyes in time to see the headlights of a car sweep over them. That's my mother, said Sistine. She stood up. Quick, she said, tell me your mother's name. Rob shook his head. Say it, she demanded. Caroline, Rob said softly, cracking his suitcase open and letting the words slip out. Sistine gave him another businesslike nod of her head. Okay, she said. I'll come back tomorrow, and we'll make our plans for letting the tiger go. Sissy, called a voice. Baby, what in the world are you doing out here? Sistine's mother got out of the car and came walking toward them. She had on high heels, and she wobbled as she walked on the gravel parking lot of the Kentucky Star. Her hair was a lighter shade of yellow than Sistine's and piled up high. When she turned her head, Rob recognized Sistine's profile, right like the side of your face. Her sharp chin and pointed nose, but the mouth was different, tighter. Good Lord, said Mrs. Bailey to Sistine. What have you got on? Clothes, said Sistine. Sissy, you look like a hobo. Get in the car. She tapped her high-heeled foot on the gravel. Sistine didn't move. She stood beside Rob. Well, said her mother when Sistine didn't move, you must be Rob. What's your last name, Rob? Horton, said Rob. Horton, said Mrs. Bailey. Horton. Are you related to Selden Horton, the congressman? No, ma'am, said Rob. I don't think so. Mrs. Bailey's eyes flicked away from him and back to Sistine. Baby, said Mrs. Bailey, please get in the car. When Sistine still didn't move, Mrs. Bailey sighed and looked back at Rob again. She won't listen to a word I say, Mrs. Bailey told him. Her father's the only one she'll listen to. And then under her breath, she muttered, her father, the liar. Sistine growled somewhere deep in her throat and stalked to the car, got in and slammed the door. You're the liar, she shouted from the back seat of the car. You're the one who lies. Jesus, said Mrs. Bailey. She shook her head and turned and walked back to the car without saying anything else to Rob. Rob watched them pull away. He could see Sistine sitting in the back seat. Her shoulders were slumped. A motel room door slammed. Somebody laughed. A dog barked once, short and high, and then stopped. And then there was silence. Caroline, Rob whispered into the darkness. Caroline, Caroline, Caroline. The word was as sweet as forbidden candy on his tongue. All right, 17. The next morning, Rob was helping Willie Mae in the laundry room. They were folding sheets and chewing 8-ball gum. All night he had tossed and turned, scratching his legs, thinking about the tiger and what Sistine had said, that he had to be set free. He finally decided to get Willie Mae's opinion. You ever been to a zoo? Rob asked her. One time, said Willie Mae. She cracked her gum. Went over to that zoo in Sorley. The place stunk. You think them animals minded it, being locked up? Wasn't nobody asking them, did they mind? Willie Mae pulled another sheet out of the dryer and snapped it open. Rob tried again. Do you think it's bad to keep animals locked up? Willie Mae looked at him over the top of her glasses. She stared at him hard. Rob looked down at his feet. When I wasn't but little, said Willie Mae, my daddy brought me a bird in a cage. It was a green parakeet bird. That bird was so small I could hold it right in the palm of my hand. She draped the sheet over one shoulder and held out a cupped hand to show Rob. It looked to him like a hand big enough to hold the entire world. I held him in my hand, could feel his little heart beating. He would look at me, cock his head this way and that. I called him Cricket on account of him singing, all the time singing. Well, what happened to him? Rob asked. Willie Mae bent down and took a pillowcase out of the dryer. Let him go, she said. You let him go? Rob repeated, his heart sinking inside him like a stone. Couldn't stand seeing him locked up, so I let him go. She folded the pillowcase carefully. And then what happened? I got beat by my daddy. He said I didn't do that bird no favor. Said all I did was give some snake its supper. So you never saw him again? Rob asked. Nuh-uh, said Willie Mae. But sometimes he comes flying through my dreams, flitting about and singing. She shook her head and reached for the sheet on her shoulder. Here, she said. Go on. Grab a hold of the other end. Help me fold this up. Rob took a hold of the sheet, and as it billowed out between them, a memory rose up before him. His father, standing out in the yard, holding his gun up to the sky, taking aim at a bird. You think I can hit it? His father said. You think I can hit that itty-bitty bird? Robert, his mother said, what do you want to shoot that bird for? To prove I can, said his father. There was a single crack, and the bird was suspended in midair, pinned for a moment to the sky with his father's bullet. Then it fell. Oh, Robert, said his mother. It hurt the back of Rob's throat to think about that now, to think about the gun and his mother and the small thud the bird made when it hit the ground. I know something that's in a cage, said Rob, pushing the words past the tightness in his throat. Willie Mae nodded her head, but she wasn't listening. She was looking past Rob. Past the white sheet, past the laundry room, past the Kentucky Star. Who don't, she said finally. Who don't know something in a cage? After that, they folded the sheets in silence. Rob thought about the bird and how when he had finally found its small, still warm body, he started to cry. His father told him not to. It ain't nothing to cry over, he said. It's just a bird. Okay.